Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Welcome back to r/ProRevenge, where in this episode, you're gonna hear 4 stories about people getting what they deserve. The first story, OP gets back at a girl who made his life miserable. The second story, OP gets a pesky neighbor to stop parking in front of his house. The third, management finds out the hard way that they fired the wrong employee. And we'll finish up with a story where OP dedicates 6 years of his life to screw over a company who wronged him. Guys, I hope you stay for the stories today and do hit that subscribe button for future stories. So, in my freshman year of high school, I was a bit pudgy and ugly. Because of this, I was the subject of a lot of people to talk about behind my back. Sometimes I would get bullied, but not too often. Because of my traits and poor hygiene, my only friends were the 2 other weirdos at my school. We would all sit off in a secluded area of the school for lunch, and barely talk to anybody. So one day, one of the popular girls in my grade approaches me and starts to chat. I remember being shy at first, but eventually I just talked normally. I wasn't really awkward, I was just kind of ugly. Fast forward about 3 weeks, she admitted that she had won a bet with her friends to see who could talk to their crush the most within a month. They were supposedly tallying all the time they spent with their crush. So her telling me that I was her crush, I was just kinda like, okay. Not sure how to acknowledge or process that. I knew there was no chance that she actually liked me, but that night, I kept toying with the idea. I convinced myself that there's no way that somebody could actually lie to me. I had to have been the luckiest guy on earth. And the next day, I decided to ask her out. So after doing so, she flat out starts laughing. She told her friends and they laughed too. For a while, I was basically the joke of the school. Of course, the bet was to actually talk to the ugliest kid and try to get them to like you, which is a terrible thing to do. Eventually, I got over it and moved on with my life. Fast forward to senior year, grade 12, second semester. At that point, I had changed my life around. Grade 9, I was this shy, awkward, ugly kid, and 3 years later, I had evolved into a more athletic person. I was on the soccer team, worked out at the gym every day, and took jujitsu 3 times a week. I wasn't too popular, but I did date a few girls and had more friends. I was at a small house party one night, and my buddy told me that the girl who hurt me in grade 9 had a serious thing for me. She was there that night, and I saw an opportunity to crush her right there, and asked her out to set my plan in motion. I dated the girl for a few months, and this is what hurts me the most and why I feel so terrible. I was the first guy she ever slept with, and the first she ever confessed her love to. We were the lovey-dovey high school couple, and even voted the cutest new couple for a Valentine's thing. She even made plans to go to the same university as me. Then prom came. I didn't even hesitate, and I don't know how I managed to become so callous at such a young age. She waited for me to pick her up for prom, except I chose to go with another girl from another school. I then called her to say, sorry, that was just a bet to see if I could talk to you and get you to like me, and then I hung up. Of course I got in massive trouble, and I did not regret it at the time, but I feel it ruined a small part of me. So I really wonder what kind of massive trouble OP got into for doing that to this girl. Guys, listen, this is a good example of 2 wrongs not making a right. I personally think for OP to hold a grudge and then come back and basically making her fall in love, taking her virginity, and then giving her that lasting memory of him doing that to her out of spite is just really twisted. Guys, I was scrolling through the comments, and yes, a lot of people say that if you're not in his shoes, you wouldn't understand. But I can't be the only one who thinks what he did was a little bit overkill. So this happened a few years ago. My neighbor started to park on the street behind my car, like literally inches for no apparent reason. My neighbor has a driveway which is empty and also lived 2 houses down the street. I don't have a driveway, so on-street parking is a must for me. So after a few weeks, I asked if it was necessary to park so close when there was literally no cars on the street for over a quarter mile. He told me no, but there's no laws against it, with a big smile on his face. Well, a few weeks pass by, and my car gets hit because someone thought there was enough room to clear, as his truck blocked the view of my car entirely. I see this happen, but unfortunately cannot get a model or a license plate number. I then asked him again if he could just park further down the road closer to his house. He replied, nope, suck on it. Okay, I had lived there for quite some time, and never had any issues with him or any other neighbors. I usually kept to myself, never make noise, and don't have any noisy pets or parties, etc. So his truck has his business name on it. I Google it and find out it's his own business. There's lots of Yelp reviews, BBB ratings, etc. All these point to his website, and I go and check his website and it doesn't load up. I do some research and find out his domain is expired, so I snag it. Before I think what to do with it, I Google the owner's name and find out that he's been convicted of murder 20-ish years ago. I find a handful of links that detail his story rather explicitly. I copy and paste all those links into an email to him and said something like, well, if you want to be a jerk for no reason, I just bought your business domain and here's the links I plan on posting on it. I don't have to list your business name because all of your business listings across the internet have this URL pointing to it. Keep parking like a jerk. Yes, it's illegal, but you are willfully doing this just to annoy me. I legally bought your domain and can legally link these articles. Park behind me again and I'll launch it. Within an hour, his truck was moved onto his driveway. He asked me for the domain and I told him, when you either move or I move, I'll hand it over. Until then, it'll remain offline. So, guys, I'm glad OP got his revenge on this crappy neighbor, and I'm glad his neighbor now parks on the driveway and doesn't bother him anymore. But what in the world, guys? If I found out that I was plotting revenge on somebody who has literally taken a life and served time for it, I think I'd have to rethink my revenge, and that guy might be parking in front of my house for a little while longer. Is that just me? I can't be the only one who's cautious about taking revenge on a freaking murderer. So, my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme costs. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies, from multiple countries, taking weeks, if not months, to get up to speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a no BS kind of guy who did his job. He did it well, but also pointed out problems and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution-oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday grumpy older engineer who really knew his thing and always wanted to help if you asked, but not very forthcoming in team-building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on. As was required by his employer, he had reported this and was sure not to cause any conflicts of interest, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee, and by all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge, and he returned the favor by working very hard. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm, and a new management team installed. Initially, everybody was promised that things would remain the same, but with the new management came new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for more American corporate culture with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time, before the new management realized that the resistance to the new culture centered around him and started to pressure him to play along. When he didn't, they turned increasingly hostile. Realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers and resistance to their leadership centering around him, the workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked at the managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said yes, and he said, "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge, and his computer at the desk, and they escorted him out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately canceled the firing, claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the labor board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that said it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with the IT security protocols. The company was also aware of and had approved his side business. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send the pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held, patents that were not significant and nothing he could make serious money out of. But he still had brought them with him to the employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay. Then he went home for some vacationing and tending to his side business. So his colleagues started calling the day after for advice, since the project he had managed could not go on without him. He was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything with the management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients had phoned his private number and were told the same thing. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at, and replied with something like, "I'm sorry, you must have mistaken me for somebody who works for you." This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the labor board's decision. But until then, he was happy to consult for them, at 6 times his hourly pay. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept, and then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After 3 months, the firing came to the labor board. The employer stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, his own company, and no longer available. The labor board ruled in my friend's father and the union's favor, and he got the normal damages. 3 months of pay damage and 24 months pay severance package, including pension and of course the lawyer costs and the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10 to 15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as an arsehole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved to their own group apart from the rest of the department. The cost of her father's consultancy fees and the cost of the labor board arbitration was budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years. My friend also said her father usually met management complaints with a big grin and said, "What are you gonna do? Fire me?" Guys, this revenge is beautiful. I'm not sure what my favorite part is: the cease and desist letters on the patents he owned, his consulting fee that he was charging his company 6 times his regular pay, or the 24-month severance package. I also love that part where they fired him and they kept calling him for advice, and he said, "I'm sorry, you must have mistaken me for somebody who works here." Must be really nice to be valuable to a company. A couple of decades ago, mid-80s, I needed bodywork done on my car and took it to a large and supposedly well-regarded body shop for repairs. In hindsight, I should have known it would not turn out well when they refused to give me a quote without seeing my insurance estimate first. To keep this short, suffice to say that they screwed it up. They charged for undercoating that wasn't applied, got cheap non-OEM replacement parts, ignored the instructions to replace the fender, and instead slathered a couple of pounds of Bondo on it. Within a week of getting the car back from them, I'd returned with a long list of problems, quality complaints, and omissions. The general manager basically blew me off with a combination of indifference and rudeness. As to the quality complaints, he said, "Look, this car isn't worth putting a Cadillac level work into it. If you want it done better, you'll have to pay us more money." So I then did what most pissed off customers would do. I badmouthed the company to anybody who would listen. Anytime I saw a car in need of bodywork, I'd warn the owner against this body shop, making my case by showing them the poor work they'd done on my car. I continued to do this for at least 4 years until I finally sold the car. So the real revenge was that every 4 to 6 months, I'd call the shop and ask to speak to the GM. When I got him on the phone, I'd identify myself as the pissed off former customer and tell him that I'd saved a dozen or so people from his company's shoddy work and probably cost his shop about $10,000 or so in revenue. The first 2 calls he blew off. By the 4th call, he was getting worried and wanted my name and for me to come in so that we could come to an agreement and get you satisfied. I told him that he had already blown his one chance to make good by insulting me. I continued the calls, even after I sold the car, for about 6 years or so. Towards the end of that time, I'd point out to him that his attitude had potentially cost his company over $100,000 worth of work. On my last call, I actually got the owner, and spent a good 15 minutes on the phone with him explaining why I'd made it a 6-year mission to cost them as much business as I possibly could, and that the jerk of a GM had blown his chance of ever getting me to quit badmouthing them. I later heard from friends at a wrecking yard in the same town that the body shop has a new GM. Guys, now that is some dedication. OP spent 6 years of his life telling people to stay away from a company who wronged him. Now, I'm pretty sure we've all badmouthed places that have ripped us off before, and tried to warn people not to go there. But I never thought of calling companies and telling them about it. So to me, the phone calls were pretty petty, but finally catching the owner and getting the GM in trouble and costing him his job makes this a worthy pro-revenge. Well done, OP. Well done. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /pro-revenge. Guys, if you enjoyed the stories today, do make sure to hit the thumbs up. And if you missed the last episode of our /pro-revenge, a church pastor uses church donations to do some really shady stuff. like shady, naughty stuff, and OP ruins him. Check it out if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you.